Dr. Samuel Chen's office occupied the forgotten depths of New Geneva Research Station, where the recycled air carried hints of desperation, and the fluorescent lighting seemed designed by someone who'd only heard happiness described secondhand. 3 levels below the main diplomatic quarters, surrounded by humming servers and abandoned coffee cups that had achieved archaeological significance, Samuel analyzed communication patterns that most colleagues considered career suicide to study. Commander Zephyra had become the most feared being on the planet, though nobody seemed entirely sure why. Her mere presence caused hardened military veterans to break formation and seasoned diplomats to develop sudden urgent business elsewhere. Security footage showed grown humans fleeing corridors when she approached, not in panic but in something deeper, a primal fear response that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the reptilian brain's most basic survival instincts. Samuel's linguistic analysis suggested something more complex than simple intimidation. Her body language patterns indicated frustration rather than aggression, with micro-expressions that seemed almost lonely. The way she paused when humans fled suggested someone accustomed to rejection, rather than someone enjoying the power to terrorize. Her attempts to initiate communication followed protocols perfectly, yet somehow triggered responses that made diplomatic contact functionally impossible. The official reports described her command aura as a psychic weapon of mass intimidation, capable of reducing entire security details to quivering incompetence through proximity alone. Unofficial reports whispered that she could make people wet themselves just by looking at them, though Samuel suspected those stories said more about human psychology than alien capabilities. His data analysis revealed patterns suggesting involuntary emotional leakage rather than deliberate psychological warfare. Emergency alarms shattered the station's routine, with the subtlety of a diplomatic crisis achieving critical mass. Terrorist explosions in the refugee district sent shockwaves through the superstructure, while evacuation protocols activated with the efficiency of bureaucracy, trying to remember what it was supposed to do in actual emergencies. Samuel's monitors filled with security feeds, showing chaos spreading through corridors, as civilians fled toward extraction points that may or may not actually exist. Through the surveillance network, he watched Commander Zephyra moving through the crisis zones with purposeful precision. Security forces scattered from her path despite her obvious attempts to coordinate rescue efforts. She gestured toward trapped civilians, pointed out optimal evacuation routes, and tried to establish communication with emergency teams who promptly developed selective hearing whenever she approached. The irony was profound enough to make philosophers weep. The one being most capable of organizing effective disaster response was the same one everyone was too terrified to work with. Her tactical expertise was obvious from her movement patterns, her knowledge of station layout evident from her route selections, and her desire to help unmistakable from her persistent attempts to assist despite universal rejection. Samuel realized that humanity might be fleeing from exactly the help they desperately needed. His analysis suggested that her command aura could be uncontrolled empathic overflow from someone trying to project protective authority, but lacking the psychic framework to modulate the intensity. Humans, lacking empathic receptors, might be experiencing her genuine desire to help as overwhelming authoritative dominance that triggered fight-or-flight responses. The refugee district housed thousands of displaced families from the border colonies, cramped into temporary facilities that had become permanent homes as diplomatic solutions remained frustratingly elusive. The terrorist attack had trapped civilians in collapsed corridors, while emergency responders struggled with evacuation procedures designed by committees who'd apparently never witnessed actual emergencies. Commander Zephyra stood alone in the central corridor, surrounded by chaos while evacuation alarms wailed and security forces maintained careful distance. Her posture suggested someone accustomed to command, but isolated by circumstances beyond her control. Every attempt to help was met with flight rather than cooperation, creating a feedback loop where her increasing frustration made her aura more intense, which caused more fear, which increased her isolation. Samuel's research had focused on understanding rather than avoiding her. Months of analyzing her communication patterns had revealed linguistic markers suggesting complex emotional states, frustration, loneliness, and what appeared to be carefully controlled hope that someone might eventually understand her intentions. Her behavior indicated someone trying to help while being fundamentally misunderstood by an entire species. The emergency continued escalating around them as rescue operations faltered due to lack of coordination. Emergency teams worked at cross purposes, while Commander Zephyra's obvious expertise remained untapped, because nobody could approach her without experiencing what felt like cosmic-level intimidation. Samuel watched civilians trapped in debris, while the one person most capable of organizing their rescue stood isolated by psychological barriers that might be entirely unnecessary. His linguistic training had taught him to look beyond surface communication to underlying intent. Commander Zephyra's patterns suggested someone desperately trying to help while being trapped by circumstances that made cooperation impossible. Her isolation wasn't a choice, but a consequence of biological incompatibility between species that had never learned to understand each other's emotional languages. Samuel made a decision that violated every survival instinct and 3 years of diplomatic protocols. He was going to approach her directly and find out if his analysis was correct. The worst that could happen was abject terror, which seemed like a reasonable risk compared to watching people die, because fear prevented cooperation. He left his secure office and headed toward the corridor where Commander Zephyra waited alone. The corridor felt like walking through increasingly thick air as Samuel approached Commander Zephyra. His academic understanding of her communication, patterns competing with biological responses, that suggested immediate retreat to somewhere preferably on another planet. Her command aura hit him in waves that felt like standing too close to a psychological storm front, triggering fight-or-flight responses that made his nervous system stage enthusiastic protests about his life choices. But beneath the overwhelming intensity, Samuel detected something his linguistic analysis had predicted. The emotional resonance wasn't hostile. Her aura felt like protective authority amplified beyond human tolerance levels, similar to standing too close to speakers playing music designed for entirely different auditory systems. The intimidation was real, but it seemed involuntary rather than deliberate. "Commander," Samuel said, his voice only slightly betraying the fact that his survival instincts were filing formal complaints with his conscious mind. "I'm Dr. Samuel Chen, Xenolinguistics. I've been studying your communication patterns." Commander Zephyra turned toward him with an expression that cycled through surprise, wariness, and something approaching hope in rapid succession. Her crystalline features reflected the emergency lighting in patterns that seemed almost designed to convey complex emotions through pure visual poetry. Her elongated ears, more elegant than the typical Cathurian structure, tracked his voice with predatory precision, while her eyes widened at his apparent immunity to the terror that had sent everyone else fleeing. "You're not afraid," she observed in perfect galactic standard, her voice carrying harmonics that made spoken language sound like carefully orchestrated music. "How is this possible?" "Terrified," Samuel corrected honestly, reaching out to touch her arm in a gesture of human comfort. "But I understand that fear and hostility aren't the same thing." The moment his skin made contact with hers, the station's ancient oath sensor array engaged with the enthusiasm of technology that had been waiting decades for someone to accidentally trigger its primary function. Samuel's tablet erupted in notification cascades, while ceremonial systems throughout the station activated protocols that hadn't been used since first contact procedures were established. Heart bond initiated. His device announced with the cheerful tone of software that had no understanding of the cosmic significance of accidentally proposing alien marriage through therapeutic touching. Provisional consort connection established. Shared authority protocols engaging. Commander Zephyra's shock at being touched without terror transformed into something that looked remarkably like wonder, mixed with profound relief. Her command aura shifted from overwhelming intimidation into protective warmth that wrapped around Samuel's consciousness like being embraced by someone whose emotional language he was finally beginning to understand. "You touched me," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones that his implant translated as amazement tinged with centuries of accumulated loneliness finally finding relief. Through their newly established bond, information flowed like water finding its level after a long drought. Samuel discovered that her fearsome reputation stemmed from involuntary psychic resonance caused by her species' empathic abilities, which amplified genuine protective instincts into overwhelming waves of authoritative presence that human nervous systems interpreted as existential threats. Her attempts to help had been consistently misinterpreted, because humans lacked the psychic framework to distinguish between protective authority and hostile dominance. Every gesture of assistance had been received as intimidation. Every offer of cooperation had triggered flight responses, creating a feedback loop where her increasing isolation made her aura more intense, which caused more fear, which deepened her solitude. "My people experience emotions as shared resonance," she explained through their connection, her mental voice carrying warmth that felt like sunlight after years of winter. "Your isolation among us must feel like sensory deprivation combined with emotional starvation. I never understood why humans fled my presence until now." Samuel experienced her true emotions through the heart bond's filter: profound loneliness, desperate desire to help, and carefully guarded hope that someone might eventually see beyond the fearsome exterior to understand her intentions. Her command aura wasn't a weapon, but rather uncontrolled empathic overflow from someone whose protective instincts had been trapped inside psychological barriers for years. The terrorist attack's true scope became clear through their shared access to security systems. Explosive devices had been strategically placed to destroy evacuation routes and refugee-safe zones, forcing civilian populations into expensive private security services while eliminating evidence of coordination between supposed enemies. The conspiracy reached levels of both governments, with human defense contractors selling weapons to the same terrorist groups they were contracted to protect against. The refugee district was specifically targeted, Commander Zephyra observed, her tactical analysis flowing through their bond with crystalline clarity. The evacuation routes were blocked not by structural damage, but by carefully placed explosives designed to create bottlenecks that force civilians into private security corridors. Samuel's linguistic expertise combined with her military knowledge revealed communication intercepts, proving coordination between human supremacist groups and Cathurian separatists. Both factions benefited from maintaining fear and separation, with defense spending justified by the very threats they helped create and maintain. "Your people fear me because they've been taught to," she continued with growing understanding. "The propaganda campaigns, the exaggerated reports of my capabilities, the systematic prevention of normal diplomatic contact, it's all designed to maintain profitable isolation." Through the heart bond, Samuel felt her years of accumulated frustration finally finding outlet in shared understanding. Her desire to help had been trapped behind walls of manufactured fear, while his analysis had been waiting for someone brave enough to test theoretical understanding against practical reality. Emergency alarms continued wailing as rescue operations faltered around them, but now they had both the access and the understanding necessary to coordinate effective response to the crisis that surrounded them. The heart bond's integration allowed Samuel and Commander Zephyra to process emergency data simultaneously. their shared consciousness creating a coordination efficiency that made traditional command structures look like committee meetings conducted through interpretive dance. Her command aura, now properly filtered through their connection, transformed from overwhelming intimidation into protective authority that actually helped rescue operations instead of scattering the rescue teams. Evacuation Route 7 has structural damage that's repairable, Commander Zephyra announced through their bond, while simultaneously accessing engineering systems that should have required clearances she technically didn't possess. But the official reports claim total collapse, forcing refugees toward private security corridors that charge emergency fees. Samuel's linguistic analysis of the engineering reports revealed deliberate misrepresentation, designed to funnel civilians into profitable private services. Technical language had been manipulated to exaggerate damage, while repair estimates had been inflated to justify abandoning public evacuation routes in favor of expensive alternatives operated by the same companies that had sold equipment to the terrorists. Through their combined security access, they discovered that the conspiracy reached depths that made ordinary corruption look like honest mistakes. Human defense contractors had been selling weapons to terrorist groups while simultaneously contracting with the government to protect against those same terrorists. Their Cathurian partners profited from reconstruction services that required regular destruction to maintain revenue streams. The pattern is remarkably sophisticated, Samuel observed, his academic appreciation for systematic deception competing with horror at its humanitarian consequences. They've created a self-sustaining cycle where fear generates profits, which fund more fear, which justifies more security spending. Commander Zephyra's tactical expertise revealed the attack's true scope. Explosives had been placed not just to cause damage, but to create specific patterns of evacuation flow that forced civilians through checkpoints operated by private security firms. Emergency services had been deliberately understaffed in public sectors, while private alternatives remained mysteriously well-equipped and immediately available. Her command aura, now properly channeled through their heart bond, allowed her to coordinate rescue teams with unprecedented efficiency. Security forces who had fled her presence for months suddenly found themselves working with smooth precision under her guidance, their fear responses muted by Samuel's presence, serving as an empathic translator between species. Section C-7 has 43 trapped civilians, she reported through their connection, while simultaneously directing repair teams toward optimal access points. Standard rescue protocols would take 6 hours. Modified approach using structural analysis suggests 18-minute extraction if we coordinate properly. Samuel's role evolved from translator to bridge between human intuition and Cathurian tactical precision. His understanding of human psychology helped optimize evacuation routes based on crowd behavior patterns, while her military experience guided resource allocation with mathematical efficiency that saved lives through pure strategic brilliance. The conspiracy's evidence continued accumulating through their shared database access. Communication logs revealed coordination between supposed enemies, with terrorist attacks timed to maximize private security profits while minimizing damage to infrastructure owned by the same corporate networks. Even refugee camps had been strategically located to require expensive private services rather than efficient public assistance. Your species and mine have been systematically prevented from understanding each other, Commander Zephyra observed with growing anger that felt like controlled fire flowing through their bond. Every diplomatic failure, every communication breakdown, every incident that reinforced our supposed incompatibility, they were orchestrated to maintain profitable separation. Samuel realized that his years of analyzing her communication patterns had been preparation for exactly this moment. His linguistic training allowed him to understand that her fearsome reputation was artificial construction, designed to justify the very fear that made cooperation impossible. The untouchable monster narrative served corporate interests that profited from interspecies tension. As they worked to save civilians trapped in collapsed sections, their partnership became increasingly effective. Samuel's human intuition complemented Zephyra's tactical brilliance in ways that created rescue operations of remarkable efficiency. Emergency teams that had been paralyzed by fear of her presence suddenly found themselves participating in the most successful disaster response in station history. Section A-12 evacuation complete, she reported with satisfaction that felt like warm sunlight through their connection. Structural repairs proceeding ahead of schedule. Private security checkpoints bypassed through alternative routes that somehow weren't included in official emergency plans. However, their success attracted dangerous attention from the conspiracy's beneficiaries. Both human hardliners who viewed cooperation with the monster as species betrayal and Cathurian palace rivals who saw her bonding with a human as abandoning proper authoritative distance, began mobilizing to destroy their partnership before it could threaten profitable maintenance of fear and separation. Assassination teams are moving, Commander Zephyra noted with clinical detachment that masked deeper concern flowing through their bond. Both factions need to eliminate either you or me to break our connection and restore the profitable status quo of mutual mistrust. Dawn was approaching, and Samuel understood that their investigation had reached the point where evidence alone wouldn't be sufficient. They would need to choose between protecting their partnership and protecting their lives, with thousands of refugee evacuations hanging in the balance. The weight of decision settled around them like gravity, remembering its cosmic significance. Dawn approached with the methodical precision of a cosmic deadline that refused to acknowledge the inconvenient complexity of accidentally saving thousands of lives while exposing interstellar conspiracy through therapeutic alien touching. Samuel's caffeine withdrawal had evolved into what felt like his brain cells staging a formal protest about the inherent absurdity of becoming a diplomatic revolutionary through xenolinguistic analysis and empathic translation services. Your species' chemical dependencies create fascinating resonance patterns, Commander Zephyra observed through their heart bond, her mental voice carrying what had become familiar amusement mixed with protective concern. I'm experiencing second-hand cravings for something you call emergency espresso with existential validation, which sounds either deeply philosophical or mildly therapeutic. The final evacuation phase proceeded with efficiency that made traditional disaster response look like bureaucratic performance art. Through their shared consciousness, Samuel and Zephyra coordinated rescue operations that saved lives through pure strategic brilliance, enhanced by cross-species cooperation that neither government had thought possible. Emergency teams worked with smooth precision under her command aura, their fear responses permanently altered by understanding rather than exposure therapy. Sections A through M evacuated successfully, she reported with satisfaction that felt like digital sunlight flowing through their connection. Private security checkpoints abandoned after civilians discovered alternative routes that mysteriously hadn't appeared on official emergency maps. Corporate evacuation fees reduced to zero through competitive pressure from free public alternatives. The conspiracy's full scope revealed itself through their combined database access like digital archaeology, uncovering layers of systematic deception. Defense contractors had been selling weapons to terrorist groups while contracting with governments to protect against those same terrorists, creating self-sustaining cycles of profitable fear that justified massive security expenditures. Reconstruction companies required regular destruction to maintain revenue streams, while emergency services had been deliberately understaffed to force dependency on expensive private alternatives. The evidence is overwhelming, Samuel observed, his academic appreciation for systematic analysis competing with horror at discovering that interspecies fear had been artificially maintained for corporate profit. They've created entire industries based on preventing the cooperation that would eliminate the need for their services. Assassination teams from both factions converged on their position, with the coordination that suggested careful planning and mutual understanding between supposed enemies. Human hardliners who viewed any cooperation with the monster as species betrayal worked alongside Cathurian separatists who saw her bonding with a human as abandoning proper authoritative distance. Their coordination proved that even the extremists were ultimately serving the same corporate interests that profited from manufactured division. Standard defensive positions would protect us, but abandon the remaining civilians. Commander Zephyra noted with tactical precision that masked deeper emotional conflict flowing through their bond. Continuing evacuation operations leaves us exposed to coordinated attack from multiple directions. The climactic moment arrived with cosmic weight that made their corridor feel like the center of the universe, facing its most important decision. Commander Zephyra could withdraw to protect Samuel from political consequences, breaking their heart bond while allowing the conspiracy to succeed and profitable crisis to continue. Or she could ratify their partnership permanently, broadcasting their evidence while accepting the dangers that came with revolutionary change. "Samuel Chen," she said aloud, her voice carrying across the corridor with crystalline authority that somehow felt gentle rather than overwhelming. "Your analysis taught me that fear and understanding cannot coexist in the same space. You reached past manufactured terror to touch truth that had been waiting years for someone brave enough to translate between worlds." "I ratify our heart bond," Samuel replied, understanding finally that his career analyzing alien communication patterns had prepared him to become a bridge between species who had been systematically prevented from understanding each other. "Let the truth flow without barriers." Commander Zephyra's command aura expanded beyond the confines of their corridor, flowing through station communication systems with the force of authority finally unleashed from artificial constraints. Their compiled evidence streamed simultaneously to all networks, overwhelming corporate damage control with the sheer volume of undeniable proof, while her empathic resonance carried the emotional truth that made the data impossible to dismiss or rationalize away. The conspiracy died in real time as understanding spread faster than any political spin could contain. Defense contracts dissolved as their artificial necessity became obvious, while reconstruction companies discovered that actual peace was remarkably bad for business models based on regular destruction. Emergency services expanded rapidly once private competition disappeared, while evacuation routes opened permanently as their artificial barriers served no remaining purpose. Samuel's achievement notifications reached "Mission complete," accidentally revolutionized interspecies relations through therapeutic touching, while offering congratulations on most emotionally significant xenolinguistic breakthrough in recorded history. The universe's sense of poetic justice, he realized, was both sophisticated and deeply satisfying in its symbolic appropriateness. 6 months later, Samuel and Commander Zephyra oversaw the establishment of new diplomatic protocols that recognized empathic differences as communication opportunities rather than barriers to cooperation. The overlooked xenolinguist who had analyzed alien communication from forgotten basement offices had become the translator who helped entire species understand that fear often masked the very cooperation they desperately needed, while the feared monster had transformed into the bridge between worlds that peace had always required. "Your coffee," Commander Zephyra observed, watching him sip their morning ritual while coordinating the latest joint rescue operations, "still tastes like liquid determination with delusions of sophistication." "But it's our liquid determination," Samuel replied, feeling her mental laughter ripple through their permanent bond like warmth spreading through crystal. The cosmos, it seemed, had excellent timing and an appreciation for ironic justice that bordered